Hey, what's up guys? So, today we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man number 31. Just as a heads up, I will outright be talking about the comic book itself, so if you haven't read it, spoiler warning. Otherwise, if you don't mind following the story through my video, then you're also welcome to do so. I will be giving my thoughts and comments on this story as I go along, so if you enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's begin. So the story begins with a meeting with all the crime bosses of New York. All of them are there except for the main leader, which is Tombstone himself. I'm pretty sure that's like a big dog status right there when you're the leader of this mafia group and you're the one showing up late just keeping everyone there. Big dog energy for sure. But everyone's wondering why he called for a meeting. And this is basically to state and to remind everyone that his daughter's wedding is coming up and that when he sent out the message about it, no one responded to it. So he wanted to send out a message to make sure everyone does show up. And if they don't show up, they're very suspicious to him, and he doesn't quite like suspicious people. But anyways, once Tombstone does leave the scene, the rest of the crime bosses are left there talking amongst themselves. Here, as everyone's talking, Hammerhead brings up the fact how Fisk might be back, the Kingpin, and he might be mad because Spider-Man ended up working with Tombstone to put the Rose in prison, and Hammerhead doesn't want to be in the crossfires of Wilson Fisk. So he's sorta hinting here that he might double-cross everyone, just to be on the Kingpin's good side. But before leaving, he does state that he's gonna see everyone at the wedding. Now, for those of you that don't know or haven't been keeping up with the comics, this specific issue is about a wedding. Until the wedding itself, we follow the bachelor and bachelorette parties of Janice Lincoln, which is the daughter of Tombstone, and she's also the villainess the Beetle, and Randy Robertson, which is Robbie Robertson's son. Yeah, a lot of Robertsons there. For the most part, the parties themselves are pretty fun ways to add more character to the character themselves. This specific issue does remind me of the date that Peter Parker had with Felicia Hardy a few issues back, right before the whole story arc with Raven. The wedding itself that they're celebrating in this issue was established back way in the first art in this specific volume of The Amazing Spider-Man. That arc itself was pretty fun, but it did establish how Spider-Man for some reason can't break out of titanium handcuffs, but whatever. But anyways, as far as the bachelor and bachelorette parties go, Janice's party is pretty fun to read through. She celebrates her party with a lot of female versions of the main villain characters that we already know, like Dr. Octopus, Shocker, Electro, but we also get characters like White Rabbit and this simple character that's just a lawyer. She seems to be just a regular person that just happens to know Janice. She herself has a pretty fun interaction with White Rabbit, where they just completely do not mix. Felicia Hardy does end up showing up to the party because apparently she was invited by Janice. At first, the other ladies don't seem to be too into the idea of having Black Cat at the party, knowing she's in cahoots with Spider-Man for the most part. But once the drinks start kicking in, everyone starts having a good time. Also, during the party, Kareem shows up because apparently he's also one of the ladies. In this specific volume of The Amazing Spider-Man, Kareem has been one of my favorite characters so far. After heavy drinking, the ladies do get to the point where they want to continue the party in their costumes, and you can imagine the chaos that ensues. This is when Janice's friend, the lawyer, just calls it quits for the night because she knows this could only go wrong. This is when Kareem wants to leave the party because he's had enough. The ladies do continue their partying with their costumes inside some warehouse. They just cause destruction. And this is where it gets established that Janice, the Beetle, wants Black Cat to join her specific crime syndicate. But the Black Cat does decline her offer, claiming that she does work alone. Now this is kind of a moment for Black Cat because she asks the Beetle about getting married. So they get into it, and Felicia starts having some thoughts of her own. I'll leave her side of the story right there for a moment, and I'm gonna focus more on Randy Robertson's party. Randy's party starts off incredibly boring, very dull, and that's sort of how it stays until sort of at the end. Randy and Peter are just sitting inside of a restaurant by themselves, and they can't really come up with anything interesting to talk about. They're just kind of looking around the room, and really nothing's coming up. Randy starts asking about all the friends that he had Peter try to invite to the party, questioning why they haven't shown up. Peter just starts coming up with excuses. Eventually, Peter does start to apologize to him, claiming that he ended up forgetting and he started calling them last minute, or he just didn't get to it overall. Claiming, oh, you know me, I'm Peter Parker, I just get busy all the time, and certain things always come up. Sort of brushing Randy aside. Now, at this point in the story, we do think that Peter Parker's kind of a dick. Like, how the fuck is he just gonna forget calling this guy's homies for the party? And to make matters worse, on top of that, after that restaurant scenario, as Randy and Peter are just walking down the street, they encounter another group of fellas that are having their own bachelor party. And they look like they're having a blast, a good time. They're all just drunk, walking around the sidewalk. And Peter just goes, hey, you can go with them. And this is where Randy just breaks. He really just can't believe Peter just did all that. He confronts Peter about always making things about himself, and he's just not having it anymore. So Randy just leaves Peter and starts walking his own direction. After some time passes by, Peter's just sitting on a bench, and Randy walks up to him apologizing for what he said to Peter. This is where we find out that Randy finds out the hard way his friends just didn't want to show up, and Peter was just making a cover just so that Randy doesn't feel bad about it, inevitably just taking the blame himself. And I personally believe this is probably one of the bigger Peter Parker character moments in this specific volume that I've read so far. And there really hasn't been many, but this is definitely one of them. Then after getting together and rekindling their friendship once more, Peter does convince Randy to hop on this carousel that he was sitting right in front of, and they ride it for the night. Upon both of them having their little party together on the carousel, inevitably Peter does have to walk home by himself, and he's just thinking to himself how funny it was that he convinced Randy to go on the carousel with him. Kind of a victory for him. And this is where both of our stories clash. Peter Parker comes across Felicia Hardy. And just as a brief summary for anyone that doesn't know, at the moment in this specific volume run, Peter Parker isn't dating MJ. He's actually dating the Black Cat. MJ herself is going out with this character named Paul. She's dealing with her own personal trauma, which if you want to know more about it, I did cover the issues themselves some videos back. It's not a particularly good story, but now we're getting more context, so the universe expands a little bit more, if you will. After 31 fucking issues, like goddamn. But anyways, let's continue with the story. Upon coming across the Black Cat, she's already made up her mind, and she breaks up with Peter Parker. She explains it as them going through the motions. She tells Peter how, you haven't asked me to stop stealing things, not once. I realized that tonight, and that I realized that I haven't tried to corrupt you, not even a little bit. And that made me think, what are we even doing here? She doesn't want to remain in a relationship with Peter Parker if she's not going to try to change him in some form, or Peter's going to, also make her change. And thus, they break up. On Randy's side, right before the wedding, it looks like he's having a good night because as he's going up to his apartment, he gets surprised by the Beetle, which again is Janice, the character that he's marrying. And the boy gets lucky that night. And that concludes Chapter 1. Chapter 2, titled The Big Day, is the wedding itself taking place. Now, it looks like at the wedding, Peter Parker is entrusted to be an usher, leading everyone to their seats. So of course, there's the people that he knows, like Aunt May, Betty Brant, but ushering also includes everyone else, so the villains also start showing up. And Peter's just thinking to himself like, bro, really? I gotta sit these guys like next to Aunt May? But him being the usher is like, bro, you don't gotta sit them next to Aunt May, but that's just what he's thinking to himself. As that's happening, Randy's getting ready for his big day. We only see Randy getting ready, we never see Janice getting ready. But as Randy's getting ready, his dad walks into the room and gives him a pretty good talk. He calms down Randy because he notices that he's nervous, of course. And Randy, being mesmerized by the wisdom of his father, questions how he's so calm. And we get a funny moment where Robbie pulls out a flask that he's hiding inside of his suit jacket and says, an old trade secret. Over with Peter Parker as he's ushering people to their seats, one of Janice's friends, the lawyer from the party, walks up. After getting slightly acquainted, Peter asks her what her secret identity is as a villain. But she states that she doesn't have any secrets, she's just Michelle, a boring friend from law school. She questions Peter how his night was with Randy. Peter, being all distracted with all the supervillains nearby, his spidey sense going off and everything, he kinda doesn't hear the question situation well and just brings up, "She broke up with me," out of the blue, referring to the situation with Black Cat, insinuating that that's on his mind. Michelle the lawyer just hears this and reacts like, okay, but everything's already too hectic, the wedding's about to start, there's no way to save himself from that awkward situation. As the wedding begins and Janice is getting walked down the aisle by Tombstone, Peter notices a even larger spidey sense feeling. There's actual danger nearby, of course, to interrupt the big wedding, and some random guy shows up on a motorcycle just causing havoc. Everyone starts running away, and Tombstone, like a big boss that he is, he confronts the man on his daughter's wedding like, "Dude, you're not gonna mess this up. The fuck you want?" The man that showed up and interrupted the wedding starts blasting away at Tombstone. And as we've seen before, he doesn't really feel those bullets. Like, that dude is immune to bullets, of course. So Tombstone starts getting a little cocky, but all of a sudden he notices blood actually coming from the wounds. Somehow it actually affected him. Now, this new character that just interrupted the wedding, as Tombstone's holding his wounds, he questions what this new character's name is. And the man walks up to Tombstone, holds up his gun, aims it at his head, and just says, "I'll give you one guess. Hello from the new boss." This man is really just about to off this villain on his daughter's wedding. What? That is definitely beyond evil. But before things get real messy, Spider-Man drop kicks this man in the face before he can do any real harm to Tombstone. As this chaos is happening, we get a small section where Hammerhead is interacting with Madame Mask as they're getting away. Madame Mask questions Hammerhead whether he has any involvement in this, but he's denying any liability in this. As we see Madame Mask leave, Hammerhead pulls out a controller from his jacket pocket and presses it, and her car blows up. Now, mind you, this entire time Hammerhead is with a lady. We never get revealed who she is, but she's with Hammerhead the entire time. But I personally believe she's definitely the one involved causing this chaos, and she's just safely watching this with Hammerhead's guard. Because this dude is the obvious betrayer. Unless it gets written otherwise in the next issue, which would be funny. But so far, that's how I perceive it. Now, as Spider-Man's fighting this intruder who interrupted Tombstone's daughter's wedding, it looks like the intruder is having some trouble fighting Spider-Man. The motorcycle that he came in, it looks like to be autonomous. So under his breath, this villain says, "Hi ho Silver," and his motorcycle just comes rushing in. This is inevitably how he gets away. It moves so fast that Spider-Man just loses sight of it because there's just too many trees in this park. So far, I have complained quite a bit over the action in these comics, like specifically the Amazing Spider-Man, I mean, where the action just seems lackluster or ends like right away. It never feels like a cat and mouse kind of game. But in this specific issue, as Spider-Man's fighting this intruder, it actually feels like a real fight. And Spider-Man does feel like he's trying for sure, which is, man, the kind of bare bones stuff you do expect from a Spider-Man comic. Anyways, as the dust settles and the chaos quelms, it looks like Randy's leaving the scene with his parents, and he's not talking to Janice at all about the situation. They seem to be distant in this scenario. Randy just says that Janice has other things to worry about. She's standing right next to her father as Tombstone's getting brought into an ambulance. Which, lucky for him, he can afford an ambulance. Awesome. We finish this particular part of the story with Peter having an interaction with Aunt May, where she just states that she couldn't find Peter and she was just very scared. But Peter's just thinking to himself, how could I be so stupid? I convinced myself Randy could join the Lincoln's world, that it could be safe. I won't make that mistake again. Funny enough, insinuating that next time Spider-Man has a homie, he's just not gonna let him bang a supervillain. Which is exactly what Peter Parker does with Felicia Hardy, but what do I know? And he continues thinking, because I have a feeling something started today that's far from finished. And that's it for the special wedding issue. Now, to be more specific, the wedding part itself is like half the comic book. The other half, to be real, feels like plain advertisements. They do state how some of the stories involved in that last half sort of serve to cover some plot holes or add more story to it, and some stories to come, which are advertisements. Now, the comic book is $9.99. Like, that's an absurd freaking price for a comic book. Typically, it's like $3.99, $4.99, but this motherfucker is $9.99. I did enjoy the wedding section for sure. I can justify half of that price. But the other half, bro, most of it is advertisements. Like, I did enjoy maybe 1 or 2 stories, but advertisements. Let me start off talking about the first mini-story following the special wedding issue, where Spider-Man's just sitting on a rooftop with Miss Marvel, and he's just talking to her about how she died. Now, I can see what message they're trying to send with this specific mini-story, where they're just trying to establish the message of Miss Marvel is now considered an X-Men. Why is she considered an X-Men? Well, apparently, nowadays, the X-Men live on an island, which if they pass away, they're able to revive themselves through some previous backup that they had, and this is how Kamala Khan makes it back. Cool, I get all that. But Spider-Man unnecessarily tells Kamala Khan he's Peter Parker. Like, this dude just stands there and just removes his mask, and Kamala Khan does have her usual, like, freak out over the fact that, you know, she's a superhero fan, so realizing that Peter is Spider-Man, it's crazy to her. But realistically, like, Spider-Man's typically very protective over his secret identity, but in this case it's cool because she sacrificed herself to save the world. I don't know, I really hated that. The next story is just a pretty quick one. Nothing much really happens, it just sets up the Superior Spider-Man comic run. Dr. Octopus is just seen at the bar with no name. Some of the lower level villains are questioning why he's even there. He walks into the bathroom, looks into the mirror, and sees himself as Spider-Man and smashes the mirror. Nothing much to it, like I said, it's just a setup. The next story I actually quite like, because it's actually realistic, and it's basically about MJ following her traumatic experience with Ray-Ban and the children that she grew attached to, which inevitably it does get established that she loses them. It's actually very well written and I really like it. Although the end is kind of silly, because I appreciate the story, I kind of give it a pass. Felicia Hardy shows up and she drops a new costume for MJ because she has this new jackpot powers. Like I said, kind of silly, but I really liked the story, so we're good there. The story following that one looks like it's just a minor setup for Spider-Woman #1. And in this story, she confronts the Taskmaster at the bar with no name. I like the beginning of the story because it just has a lot of villains and it's funny to see who's there. They do bring up the fact that Doc Ock was there earlier, which is a funny way to bring up, you know, the other story that advertised the Superior Spider-Man. But anyways, Spider-Woman does confront the Taskmaster at the bar. Their entire interaction, I feel like it's poorly written. Taskmaster just gets his ass beat. Spider-Woman walks all over him. Like, Taskmaster does specifically state like, oh, if you give me 3 cheap shots again, I'm not gonna tolerate this any further. And of course, Spider-Woman just beats the shit out of him 3 times. And then he's like, oh, actually, alright, I'll give in. The story sets up how Spider-Woman is just out there seeking her child. It looks like something or someone took her baby. This next story after that one I actually liked a little bit. This one specifically sets up Spider-Boy #1. And yeah, Spider-Boy gets his own series. So far, from my understanding, Spider-Boy is just like a sidekick to Spider-Man. So far, as of the making of this video, Spider-Boy just happens to be a very popular character at the moment. Popular enough to just get his own comic run. And this story sets that up. It gets established that there's this family that's just full of mad scientists, and they all have some involvement in creating the supervillains we know as the Lizard, the Fly, the Scorpion, Rhino, Morbius, and it looks like they also had some involvement in creating Spider-Boy. This one definitely ends in a cliffhanger. It gets me interested in Spider-Boy's universe. I mean, I haven't even read the comic where he's from, but just this family of super evil geniuses that apparently is involved in creating all these monsters is really what interests me the most. I thought the mother's phone call with her daughter was pretty entertaining. The next story is just a pretty simple one. It just involves a character who's just a civilian, and he is very addicted to getting saved by superheroes. So it gets established how first he was addicted to getting saved by the Fantastic Four, and then he got addicted to being saved by Spider-Man, which in this story, Johnny Storm and Spider-Man find out a way to get this guy off his back. And it ends in a pretty funny way, because once they do get him off Spider-Man's back, the civilian looks over at the sun setting and he sees Daredevil and he's like, insinuating that his next addiction is gonna be, of course, being saved by Daredevil. Mildly entertaining comic for sure. Again, another simple one next, where Spider-Man's just hanging out on a rooftop playing on his phone. Mind you, this story and the previous one, they have very simplistic art styles, which to signify the story itself isn't to be taken too seriously. Almost feels like a newspaper comic, you know, like a Garfield one, for example. But anyways, this story involves Spider-Man on a rooftop, and he encounters a goose. Just randomly shows up. And so Spider-Man befriends the goose. As they're hanging out, Dr. Octopus shows up and starts causing havoc. He notices that Spider-Man's hanging out with the goose, and he questions it. And Spider-Man's just desperately just trying to hide the goose. But the goose, he's hard. He goes off after Dr. Octopus and scares him. Scares him so much that he ended up just leaving Spider-Man alone. In the end, Spider-Man celebrates with the goose and how he scared Dr. Octopus off. The goose turns over to Spider-Man and he digs into his pocket. Spider-Man's like, "Whoa, pal, boundaries," and takes out a cookie. Spider-Man's like, "Hey, my emergency cookie." The goose hops on the edge of the building and just flies away. Funny short story there. The goose just wanted Spider-Man's emergency cookie. Now, the second to last story, I would say more actually fits in with the main storyline because it's sort of a prelude to the next issue that's coming up, number 32. It establishes how Kraven the Hunter and the Green Goblin are in some sort of conflict of their own. Within their own conflictness, these motherfuckers are horny. But within their own conflict, they find attraction towards each other. They end up sleeping together, but in the end, it doesn't look like Kraven fully trusts her. Still, it looks like they're going to be working together to somehow defeat Spider-Man. I like the prelude to the next comic, but I personally think they should have just added it to the wedding issue. Like, do a little sort of like, meanwhile, this is happening as these guys are out partying. But no, for some reason, they decide to put it in second to last in this comic. Like, you don't gotta advertise the next comic. I'm gonna buy it. I don't know if anyone else will, cause like, this specific comic I'm talking about is $9.99. And if these motherfuckers are charging that much for a comic that's half actual comic and half advertisement, I don't know if anyone else is going to continue reading. I guess that's why they felt the need to just add another advertisement to the next issue instead of just adding that segment to the main wedding story. But what is? And the last advertisement in this comic is apparently the most notorious Spider-Man story ever. I mean, it looks very dark and grotesque, but there's not much besides that. Just another teaser to another comic run they're trying to sell me. Overall, legitimately though, I do want to say I enjoyed the comic, but as someone that spent fucking $9.99 on it, holy shit, I kind of want to say it wasn't worth the price, but I do like how they ended up portraying the characters in the wedding issue. That was pretty fun. Peter had a pretty good moment, but that definitely doesn't justify that price. Like, the only advertisement stories I did enjoy, but I'm not condoning them as a basic practice, this shit should have just been in the comic to begin with, are like the MJ story where she's just talking about dealing with her trauma. That should be in the Amazing Spider-Man already, which, as I'm talking about, like, yeah, it is in the comic, but it's being sold to me as like an advertisement to her own specific comic run that she's getting herself. The setup to the Spider-Boy miniseries, the freaking teaser advert to the next issue, number 32. I liked it, but the fuck, man? Why are you separating it? Everything else just felt like a crammed in edition from Free Comic Book Day, but instead of it being free, you're actually paying for it. That's my biggest gripe. But anyways, I would like to hear what you guys thought about these specific stories and what you guys think about this $9.99 price for this comic. And if you enjoyed listening to me talk about Spider-Man comic books, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.